Now, there are different ways of doing PBL. One of the classical methods is called the 7 steps, and this was formulated by the University of Maastricht in Netherlands, and this is the variation which we use in the College of Medicine. So all the activities are done in the form of small groups. There are around 10 to 12 students in one group. They sit together with one facilitator, the tutor or the teacher, and the steps are, first they have a scenario, a case given to them, which in our place is usually a paper trigger. It's on paper, but it can be a video, it can be a newspaper clipping, it can be anything which can trigger the interest. After that, they sit together and they try to clarify the terms first, which means that, for example, the scenario might have some words which are difficult to understand. So they ask each other, do you understand what this is? If somebody can clarify it, it's fine. If not, they keep it up later to see what they can do it later. So first step is clarifying terms. The second is the most important thing, which is defining the problem. So they try to define what exactly the problem is. The third is called brainstorming. So they sit in a group, they try to see what the problems are, how they can solve the issues. After the brainstorming, they try to arrange what they did so far, organize it. So this is called structuring. So you have clarifying the terms, you have the definition of the problem, you have brainstorming, then you have the structuring. At the end of this whole thing, the group finds that there are some things which they don't know, which nobody in the group can really answer. These things are converted into what we call learning objectives. So the group itself decides that, okay, we know this, but we don't know some of this. So those things are written down. They call learning objectives. They go back, they search for information, and they come back for the next session to synthesize the whole thing together. Okay. So this is the 7-step method which we follow for PBL in our place. It's called the Maastricht 7-step method. So you clarify the difficult terms, you define the problem, you brainstorm, you structure it, you formulate your learning objectives, you go back, you prepare those objectives, the whole group discusses it once more, and the whole thing is synthesized into one single presentation or document. So yeah. We call it synthesis because what happens is, once the learning objectives are formulated, it is divided among the group. So for example, one student will take one objective, the other student takes one objective. The next session, when they come together, everybody discusses the whole thing. So I discuss what I prepared, the other student discusses what he prepared. So that whole thing is joined together. So that's why we call it synthesis. You can apply it. It comes together actually. So synthesis and application will actually come side by side. The term which we use is synthesis, but you're right, that is actually application. Okay.
Like non-taxonomy.
Yeah, some of the words that.
From census to application.
Yeah, in Bloom's taxonomy actually there's a change in the top, but here what we mean is that we join together the whole information. But you're right, you can apply that back to the case to make sure that everything is solved now. Okay, so that everything is clear now. It is just that the word which we use is synthesis for that final step. Okay. Any queries so far?
For example, the first step, like clarifying term, is not certain. So how can they move to the second step?
Yeah. So the recommendation is that if when you do the clarifying step, if something is not clear, that can also be added to the learning objective. So you say that.
Then how can they define a problem if they don't understand the term?
Yeah. So
I
that.
think that step has to be accomplished in the first session, or it has to be can be in the second.
Usually it is accomplished in the first session, and it is recommended that problems are made in such a way that the clarifying term should not be a hindrance. So that comes at the problem design stage. But theoretically, in a rare situation where you have a problem that some term is not clarified, you can put it in the objective. You can still define.
They can open the book during the
Yeah, in our place we do that. In our place we actually allow them to look up the dictionary for difficult terms. Some places they don't do that, but it's a personal choice.
Is it allowed to do open the dictionary?
Yeah, they can look in the net also for the terms alone, not for the concepts. For the terms, yes, they can do that. Yes, sir.
So what is the role of the teacher in these 7 steps?
Thank you, sir. Valid question, and we'll be coming to that. So in the later skills, we'll actually be telling what the role of the facilitator is over there. So if I think if you can wait for some time, we'll be going to that area. Any other questions so far? Yeah.
Problem solving over here. They will come back in the next session and then solve?
Yeah, so there are different ways of doing it. One of the classical methods we use is the two-session method. So in the first session, they get the problem, they discuss it, they brainstorm, they find that some things they're not clear with, so they formulate the learning objectives. They go back home and the group works on those learning objectives. The next session they come back and they share the information. Okay. In the second session. Okay. So that's where the synthesis and, like the doctor said, application occurs. Once everything is clear, ideally you need to go back to the case and see, is everything clear? So that's where you apply that knowledge and make sure that the whole thing is clear, it's solved. Okay. So usually it's a two-step method, not a single step. Pardon?
By clear, you mean solve.
Yeah, that again depends on the, which is why we started out by saying that there's a difference between problem solving and problem based learning. So some sessions are problem solving. For example, like we said, we have cases in which you have some information, and based on those information, the students have to reach a diagnosis or plan a treatment. But some of them are open-ended. So there's nothing to solve as such. It is just that you're learning based on that. You're exploring knowledge. Okay. Yes, sir. We have actually tried that. So we actually have a publication in which we have tried it without tutors in a remote manner. It works, but not as good as being a live. We did it as a group, and it worked, but it will never be as good as an actual live session where you have the tutor actually doing it in front of them. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but it depends, the key to this is the group. So if you have a group of students who can sit remotely and do it online, it can work. But it depends on the maturity of the group, depends on how much experience they have. We have actually tried that in our fourth year students in dermatology. It worked, but what we felt was that it was not as good as the proper traditional PBL, where you have the tutor actually facilitating it live. Okay. So theoretically it can work, but generally it is not recommended to do it. Okay. Does it answer the question, or? Yeah. No, because the whole idea is that half the skills are related to your group function. So whether you want to brainstorm, whether you want to learn collaboratively, you need a group to do it. So single student will not work. You can have a remote group doing it, but single student will be difficult. Okay. Dr. Joel, time? Okay. And the two other things which are crucial to this process working is feedback and reflection. So those are the two other skills which we'll be discussing in detail, how to use feedback and how to use reflective skills in PBL. Coming to problem solving proper, anybody familiar with this gentleman? This is a Hungarian mathematician, his name is George Polya, and he wrote a famous book called How to Solve It, which is considered to be the main reference for problem solving. And he's done a lot of work on it, including devised different ways to do problem solving. And one of his key inputs is that to teach students problem solving, you need to think like a student. You need to be in their shoes and try to see how they will think. Only then you will be able to actually get them to do proper problem solving. So this is George Polya. Like we said, whether it is problem based learning or problem solving, one of the key things is designing the scenarios. And here the two important things is that number one, it should be contextual. So the problem you have is something which the student should feel that he or she will be using it later in life. So it should be contextual and simulating real life as much as possible. And number two, you need to keep it a bit vague and open-ended. I mean, if it's a very simple problem where you're trying to say that, solve 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, it doesn't help really to develop problem solving. So it needs to be a bit complex. They need to use the methods which they have in a slightly different manner. They need to think outside the box. Only then problem solving really works. Okay. So contextual, real life problems. And number two, you need to make problems in such a way that it stimulates a bit of critical thinking and decision making, not just applying their previous knowledge. Anybody knows who that is? So that is the tallest man and the shortest female sitting together. And one of the reasons again which problem solving is gaining so much importance is because they say that there is a mismatch between the content and application. So the point which we discussed earlier, that if you ask the end user, the market, about our students, one of the comments which we get often is that they have knowledge but they don't really know how to apply it. Okay. So that mismatch is one of the reasons why we need to stress more on problem based and problem solving learning. Now the steps of classical problem solving, you will find that it is somewhat similar to the PBL. So you start off with the problem, you define the problem, you brainstorm for solutions, you pick a solution, you implement it, and you review the results. Okay. What is missing as compared to PBL? So we had a 7-step for the PBL, and here also you have a 5-step method. Some of it is similar. So you start with a problem, you define it, you brainstorm, but it is slightly different. And how is it different? So one is clarifying terms, but usually that comes as part of definition, so that may not be much of a difference. More importantly, so here you're just picking a solution and seeing whether it works. There is no further learning based on that, okay, because usually problem solving is more closed-ended solutions, while in PBL, that problem is actually to tell you what you know and what you don't know. And the what you don't know part, you need to go back, study, and share with the rest of the group. Okay. So here there is no step where you formulate objectives and synthesize it. Here it is look for solution, apply it, work, doesn't work. That's it. Okay. So slightly different as compared to PBL. But here also it works only when you use these two crucial elements, which is feedback and reflection, and we'll come to that later, inshallah. So is it only about knowledge in problem solving? So what we said is that PBL problem solving is slightly different. Problem solving is more of just applying it and see if it works. Does that mean that it is only about knowledge, or are there something else also? Yes.
Simply here we are searching this for the implementation or the skills to implement
Right.
a solution or something, while in problem-based learning we are searching for knowledge, okay, and acquiring knowledge, but in a critical way.
Thank you. Any other? Yeah. Anything else?
We will also integrate values and test the affected domain.
So you need a skill of integration also. Thank you. So studies have shown that even for problem solving, the affective domain is very important. So you need motivation, you need attitudinal aspects, confidence, leadership, and all those things over here also. It is not just knowledge. And more importantly, effective problem solving often requires teamwork. You may not be able to do a lot of things yourself. So these are some similarities with the problem-based learning, the classical problem-based learning. Now you might be familiar with this concept. It's known as the stages of competence by somebody called Maslow. It is said that when you acquire a skill, you progress from a stage which is called unconscious incompetence to a stage which is called unconscious competence. Remember that the final stage is unconscious competence. Okay. Classical example is when you learn to drive. Earlier it would be this side only, but now I'm sure it will be here also. Okay. When you learn to drive, you don't know anything, and you know that you don't know it. So you don't know what is a gear, you don't know what is a clutch, and so on. Gradually you proceed to a stage where it comes automatically. So you can change the gear, you can change the acceleration, you know when to turn, and you don't have to think much about it. So that is called unconscious competence. So you're moving from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. So this is the final stage which you should not be doing. You will get a fine of, I think, 500 riyal if you do that. So it is said that we achieve this stage of unconscious competence by the building of what we call schemas. So in our mind, there is one scheme for putting the gear, there is one scheme for acceleration, there is one scheme for turning when required, there is one scheme to brake when required, and we start integrating this schema as we develop the skill. And this is known as schema theory, and this is one thing which is said to be crucial to problem solving. So the more schemas you develop in your mind, the more you are able to solve problems effectively. So this is called the schema theory. The other theoretical part, which we'll just go through quickly, is called the Dreyfus model. So theoretically they say that when you come to problem solving, you start off from what is called a novice to what is called an expert. And the difference between these two is that the expert has a lot more schemas in his mind. So he is able to apply it much more faster, much more effectively. We have one particular method which is called the hypothetico-detective method, and we have one method which is called the pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is what is usually done by experts, while the hypothetico-deductive model is what is done usually by the novice. An example is, does anybody recognize this? Anybody other than from the College of Medicine? Pardon? Wart is what is, okay, one possibility. What do you think the disease is?
We are not. Sorry for this.
Yeah.
I don't like this picture.
Pardon?
I don't like this picture.
Any reason?
Yeah, it's not that good for me. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you
It's
feel.
a flower or something.
Ah, right. Okay. Okay.
We are not in medicine college. So
Understood. Sorry about that. So why I put this is just to illustrate a point that when you have an expert, like Dr. Joel is a dermatologist, he will be able to see the picture and just make the diagnosis. He does not need much of other knowledge. Okay. But if you have a student who is doing it for the first time, he will just see a small skin rash and he will try to see, okay, does it fit into something? What extra questions do I need for that? What extra examinations do I require? So for the expert, he uses what we call pattern recognition. He just sees it, sees a pattern, makes a diagnosis. While the student, he uses hypothesis deduction. So he tries to make a hypothesis, tries to test it out, apply it, works, does not work, takes more time and probably not as effective as pattern recognition. So it was just for that point, but I got your point, sir. That. Okay. So like we said, expert problem solvers, they have deeper understandings, more context, and they are able to draw on the experience in the past. And they can switch between different strategies quite quickly as compared to the novice. So when you want to move from a novice to an expert, the most important few things is, number one, you need the knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, any skill will not work. So you need the content knowledge, number one. And number two is you need practice. So like we said, a doctor who sees more cases will be able to diagnose it much easier. So more content knowledge, more practice. So that comes to the next question, can you teach problem solving? Can you actually teach problem solving as a skill? Yes, sir. Okay. You can, but to some extent is what you feel. Any other opinion? Yes? Yeah. So teaching may not be that effective, but you can apply it more and more. Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, thank you. Yes. With, thank you. So you can actually teach how it is done, but you need practice to develop it. Okay. Anything else? Okay, so again coming to what evidence we have based on studies, it is generally said that you cannot really teach it that well. So you cannot really actually tell somebody how to do problem solving and leave it at that. What you need is really practice, and the best way to do it is in small group learning. So using collaborative, constructive methods in small groups is the best way to teach problem solving. So that is what evidence shows. So what does all this mean? So we discussed a bit about problem-based learning, we discussed about problem solving, lot of theories, quite boring. What is your final conclusion based on all this? Any comments? I think we'll start off with the first thing which we discussed. Do you think it is same or is it different? What do you feel now?
There are some difference, but I think objective is same.
Okay.
There are different methods of learning.
Right.
One is a problem-based learning, one is a problem-solving learning. But I think in the end, the objective is same. The process may be a little bit different.
Right. So you feel that the process might be slightly different, but the whole aim is same in the end. Okay. Any opinion here? Pardon? The question was, we started off with one point whether problem-based learning and problem-solving is same or is it different? What do you think after the whole story?
They have some similarities and also some differences.
Okay, so that would be the main conclusion that we have, that they're not exactly the same, but there is significant overlap between them. Problem solving is one of the essential skills which is incorporated into the PBL process. Okay. And the other common thing which we have in both is that for both of them, the best way to achieve it is through small group learning, where you have the constructive, collaborative learning. So although many people actually use them interchangeably, they're actually slightly different, not really the same. But the key point is that the best way you can use to teach problem solving is by small groups, just as in the case of problem-based learning. Okay. So what we will do next is try to see how to use small groups to apply problem solving or problem-based learning. Okay. Yes, sir.
Can we say this, that the problem solving is a part of problem-based learning?
Absolutely. So we said that one of the key skills which we hope to achieve by problem-based learning is problem-solving abilities. So that is an integral part of problem-solving, problem-based learning. Okay, so we are ahead of time. We have 10 minutes. So anything else you would like to discuss for the point so far?
Can you apply?
Yes, sir.
Can you apply this? Because I mean, you are giving most of the examples from medical side. Here we have from science, computer. Can you
Right.
apply this concept of problem-based learning or problem-solving approach, for example, in College of Computer or other colleges?
Absolutely. In fact, the first history of problem-based learning actually is from a technical college. It was with engineering. So if I remember right, it was something to do with the radio assembly. So there was a teacher who felt that, just teaching them about radio assembly was not really helping them. So he actually one day he bought all the parts, put in front of them, he told them assemble it. Okay. So they were actually learning on the job using their previous knowledge. And that would be an example of problem-based learning. So it can be used for any field. But the key point again is that the triggers you use need to be contextual and a bit open-ended. If it is too closed, there's no challenge involved. So they'll finish it in 10 minutes and it'll go away. And if it is not contextual, they will never get the importance of using that. So they will learn a bit, but it will not be really deep learning. So it can be used for any field. The problem is the crucial thing. The design of the problem would be the crucial thing. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a rather related question. I'm from College of Computer Sciences.
Yes.
And we have a lot of theories, frameworks, algorithms, mathematical models, things like that.
Right.
So clarifying terms, to me, it looks like a very limited step.
Right.
So where do you fit in all these hard mathematical skills? I mean, in these 7 steps.
Right.
I cannot see, how I can
Okay.
put in those.
I will see if I can try to answer that. Even for us, when we have a scenario, so a typical scenario will be 2 or 3 paragraphs in which we start off by saying that 29-year-old male patient presents with a rash on the body, he has fever, temperature is this, etc., etc., etc. The difficult terms are usually not much of an issue. There are usually only 2 or 3 terms, and that they immediately look it up and finish it off. So even though we put that as a step over there, that's not a major thing. The problem is in defining the whole thing. What are you looking for? And that, I think, should be the same with a mathematical model. So if you have a mathematical problem, your question will be, how do you define the problem? What is the problem that I have to solve? Okay. And based on that, you're going for the brainstorming. So in the brainstorming, you start getting up different options, suggestions. You structure those options, join them together, and then you start applying it. Okay. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that clarifying terms thing is not a big thing, which is why if you see the problem solving steps also, we don't actually include that as a separate step. Probably just comes along with the definition of the problem.
So you can use it to explain a theory or a mathematical model or a framework like in computer science,
Yep.
we have algorithms.
True.
So most of the time what we do,
Mhm.
we take like 60-70% of the time to explain those frameworks, and
Right.
then 20 to 30% of time to take a case study and then apply it.
Okay.
So how does that differ from these 7 steps?
Right. But who explains it?
The instructor.
Okay. So here the whole concept is that we are not doing anything from the instructor's side. The instructor is passive. The student is the one who is leading the whole session. And you're assuming that the basic knowledge required for that case is already there with the students. That comes as separate lectures or whatever it is. The case itself is completely student-led. So it starts off with the students.
So like if you have 2 sessions a week, one session will be spent on theoretical knowledge and the second will be problem solving?
No, not exactly. So what happens is that the first session, the students come, they read the scenario. Okay. The students themselves discuss, okay, there are some terms which are not clear. Does anybody know it? So they try to solve those issues. Something is not clear, even then they can look it up in the internet or they can go back and then refer later. Okay. The teacher's role in that stage is just to facilitate. So he just sits on the side. The important thing is that for each session there is clear objectives. So the teacher knows that in this session what the students should be able to do is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If the teacher feels that the students are moving away from the objectives, that the discussion is going a bit away, the teacher brings them back and tells them that, okay, maybe you need to think of this or maybe that. But the teacher is not giving information. The teacher will not teach over there. So it's an independent learning process. There are lectures in our curriculum also, but the concept which we follow is that the lectures are conceptual, which means that we don't give knowledge intensive lectures. We teach broad frameworks which they can apply into these sessions. Okay. So I hope that answers it a bit. Yes, sir.
Actually, I might be repeating something that because I cannot hear the question.
Understood. I think we don't have a mic, unfortunately.
So
Oh, yeah.
it seems to
Yeah.
me that this the problem-based learning, it might be, or it looks like it's very essential for some majors teaching some subjects.
Right.
But to me, because the audience are from different, colleges, different programs,
Right.
areas,
Right.
if you can give some examples, if I'm teaching English, for example,
Okay.
do I have to approach, is this the best approach for me to use in teaching? If
Okay.
I'm teaching chemistry, for example,
Right.
or math.
Right.
Medicine is excellent, engineering is excellent,
Right.
sociology maybe is excellent,
Right.
but there are many other majors.
Got
Is
that.
it a must for the instructor? I will not call him facilitator because we didn't reach that level.
Understood. Yeah.
Is it a must, or he should be the judge, or to make combination depending on the subject he will teach next week or this week?
Okay. So if I
Examples will help a lot.
understood. Yeah. So I think one of your questions is that should the facilitator be just a facilitator or should he also teach during the session? That's one question you're asking. Is that it or?
That's it. Also, a technique. Should you apply it everywhere?
No, I got that. But the second question is what I'm saying, that you're also asking whether the facilitator should be teaching or should be.
Exactly, because some majors you have to teach.
Understood. Yeah.
Say you go there and come, I will facilitate you.
Okay. So I'll just answer that part first. In our college, for example, irrespective of the case, the person who handles the session is not an expert in that case. For example, the case might be cardiology, but the person who is handling it might be a biochemist. So he need not be an expert. Reason being that he has a manual which tells what the objectives of the session are, and he is just making sure that the students are reaching those objectives, just directing them. Okay. The second point, it can be used for any specialty. Okay. An example in chemistry, for example, we talked about, would be that you say that a professor does an experiment. Okay. In the experiment, he mixes 2 chemicals. He finds that the color of the solution turns red or blue or whatever it is, while he was actually expecting it to turn something else. Okay. End of scenario. The students start working on it by each sentence. Okay. For example, he mixed those solutions. Do they know what the solutions are? Number 2, if you mix them, what happens normally? Okay. What happened here? Why it happened? What could be the possible reasons? So the whole idea is you are using a scenario to trigger learning. And you will find that, even if it looks very simple, there are many areas which the students don't really know for sure. And those things are converted into learning objectives. So the students say that in the next session, okay, we'll look up these things, we'll come back and we'll discuss this as a group, and then we'll try to apply it on that particular case scenario. So theoretically it can be used for everything, sociology, English, chemistry. But your question on whether it is the best method is very valid, because there are a lot of issues with PBL. Most important being trained facilitators. You know, you really need a lot of manpower, you need those small rooms, you need a lot of logistics. If you don't have those things, it doesn't really work that well. So many places where you have less faculty to deal with it, logistics are not that good to handle so many small groups, there you probably need to think twice before applying PBL. But if you have those facilities, theoretically it works for everything, irrespective of the specialty. Okay. Does that somewhat answer it? Or okay. What we can do is, yeah.
College of Art, for example, the classroom size is about 100 students or more sometimes.
Right.
How many groups, how you can apply it. So sometimes it's in medicine, it's excellent. It's the best way to evaluate.
Absolutely. So that's,
But some majors, still, you have to babysit the students. And that maybe to stimulate and ask questions and make them, with objectives.
true. Absolutely.
Use it as is, the complete, full method. It might not,
Understood. So the point would be that, it really is not the content or the subject that is important, but it's more to do with the logistic and the local situations. Okay. Yes, sir.
Logistics is one part.
Yes.
When you have a large classroom. The other thing is, you may not be able to cover a lot of information
Right.
in a given period of time.
Right. Right.
We don't have the flexibility of having unlimited time to
True.
cover a certain
True.
information.
Right.
We are constrained by the number of contact hours. we
Right.
have.
Right.
Doing everything in this PBL could be a little challenging
Absolutely.
with respect to the time constraint.
Right. So we actually have the same problem over there. So which is why we said that, we have lectures, but what we do is that those lectures are more of frameworks. They're conceptual. So we tell them the basic concepts and they start applying it in the small groups. That is the theoretical part, but it doesn't work that well. I'm sure that the friends in medicine will agree with me. The problem is that, especially our students are probably not that independent. Like this curriculum which we have, we got it from the University of Groningen in Netherlands. There it works really well because students are independent from day one. While for us, we have to have a bit of hand-holding. So in the initial stages, we need lectures, we need to give them a bit of content knowledge. Then you start applying it, they start working on it, works. The second thing is, one of the basic concepts of PBL is that a lot of learning is self-directed. So if you find in our curriculum also, you'll find a lot of slots are actually for the students to learn on their own. So the idea is don't give them all the knowledge, let them do a lot of independent work also. Again, easy to say, not very easy to apply. So we understand that problem, we have the same issues. What happens normally is that with time, if you apply it properly, the students start being very good self-learners. Okay. So a lot of things you will find that you don't really need to cover the whole content from A to Z. You give them a brief framework, the rest they will build upon it. So that usually works, takes time, trained faculty, logistics, patience, but usually it works. Okay. Okay. 10 o'clock, break.